Oh, how awful. Did he at least die painlessly? To shreds, you say? Very well then. Good news, everyone!
Nothing to see here, folks. Just the internet casually celebrating a cold-blooded murder. We're going to break down the murder of a healthcare CEO that's being celebrated by some deranged pockets of the internet and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, across our politics, and across the media, all from an independent perspective. So in case you've been living under a rock, a huge story is breaking the internet right now because United Healthcare CEO, one of the biggest health insurance companies in the US, Brian Thompson, was just gunned down in Manhattan in a really chilling assassination that was captured on video, which of course I'm not going to show you here, but it's pretty disturbing stuff. The investigation is still ongoing, so we're still speculating about the shooter and the motive and all that, but many people suspect it has something to do with the controversial policies of the insurance company, but we don't know that for certain. Thankfully, though, the discourse online has been pretty rational and reasonable, with Americans, no matter how they feel about the complicated web that is US healthcare policy, coming together to just agree that, like, murdering a family man and a father of two isn't good. Just kidding. They've kind of done the opposite. On TikTok in particular, this CEO's murder has been celebrated like some sort of happy or positive event. We're going to take a look at a couple of videos doing the rounds with this sentiment that are kind of horrifying, honestly.
I woke up this morning to finding out the most corrupt CEO in America got fucking assassinated in the middle of the street like a medieval king.
It's weird to sound gleeful about an assassination. And do you actually have any reason to believe that United Health CEO Brian Thompson was the most corrupt CEO in America, or are you just saying that?
But he got put down like he was a witch. As soon as I saw that video, I knew for a fact that was the worst person I've ever seen that just got shot like that. I didn't know anything about him before that.
Hold up. You just admitted you didn't know anything about this man until 5 seconds ago, but you're celebrating his death and labeling him the most corrupt CEO in America. The math here is not mathing.
But I just knew. I fucking knew. Nobody's getting put down in the street like a dog like that without there being like a very probably valid reason.
Did he just suggest that if somebody gets killed in the street in a particular fashion, that must mean they're bad? The logic there doesn't follow. I mean, lots of people have been assassinated, including Martin Luther King Jr. Doesn't mean they were inherently bad. That somebody who's assassinated could be bad, even if they're assassinated in this kind of manner, that doesn't actually tell us anything about them. Like, what is this logic?
If you're wondering what the reason is that he got put down like a dog in the middle of the street, look at these denial rates of his insurance company.
So you actually don't know that. I mean, it may well be because of somebody was upset with his company's policies, but we don't know that for sure yet. And it's kind of irresponsible to speculate as a social media influencer about these kinds of things without evidence.
How are you even able to deny 36% of people from healthcare that they're already paying for?
He literally had the graph right in front of him that says 32% and went out here and said 36%. But I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I think even if this insurance company was really stingy and denied people's claims unfairly a lot, which we don't know just because they denied a high percentage of claims, that could be true, I still wouldn't support the CEO being murdered in cold blood. Like, that's actually bad. Maybe if they're doing something criminal, they should be prosecuted. Maybe people should switch to other companies or boycott them if their business practices are unfair. But it's still not okay to justify murdering somebody. And it's worth pointing out that almost nobody ever appeals, like a single-digit percentage ever appeals these denials, even though when they do, they almost always win. Some of this might be valid frustration with the company being stingy, but I've talked to a couple people who work at UHC, and they've also told me that a lot of this high denial rate stems from people not understanding what the insurance they purchased actually covers, and they are submitting claims for things that their policy simply does not cover. Obviously, that has to be rejected. They don't have leeway about that. Again, I'm not here to defend insurance companies or tell you that they're like the best thing in the world, but it seems like many of these influencers celebrating this dude's death don't actually know anything about this company and are just kind of hopping on a socialist bandwagon to celebrate an assassination because they hate capitalism and just inherently hate businesses. That's kind of deranged. Guys, the internet's take on this story only gets more crazy, and we're going to dive into it. But first, a quick message from today's sponsor. Guys, I recently recommitted to a new health and fitness routine. Can you tell? And I'm doing that with the help of today's sponsor, Lumen, which is helping me increase my energy levels, feel better in my body, and gain muscle. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a cool and easy to use device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs, and gives you tailored advice to improve your workouts, nutrition, stress management, and even your sleep. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. Lumen doesn't just help you measure your metabolic health, it also gives you meal suggestions and other ideas to improve it. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health or get a great gift for the health-conscious person in your life, go to lumen.me/Brad for 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/Brad for 15% off your purchase, also available at the link in the description or in the pinned comment. And now, back to the show. So this young man seems lovely and stable, but he was far from the only one on the internet to literally celebrate the assassination of Brian Thompson. Here's some more videos.
I think we all needed some good news today. Obviously, I would never publicly condone violence of any kind, but I don't think anyone should feel bad about this.
Oh, I love how he says, I would never publicly condone violence. Like the only reason he wouldn't do it publicly is because he might get in trouble or backlash. He's saying, yeah, I totally do condone violence. I just can't really say it publicly. You know, TikTok I might get in trouble. It's like, so you're admitting you actually do support violence. And am I crazy, or are assassinations of random citizens bad? Like calling that good news, no matter how you feel about insurance companies or US healthcare policy, which is incredibly complicated and definitely broken in large part by government rules and regulations. It's just sick and weird to celebrate the cold-blooded murder of a businessman and call it good news.
The entire business model of private health insurance companies, especially United Healthcare, is to prey on the most vulnerable people in society.
Not quite. The business model of private insurance is risk pooling, making it so that a bunch of people can pay into a system, and then in the small percentage of cases where they have huge astronomical expenses, insurance can cover it, rather than everyone just having to kind of roll the dice and then potentially being screwed with huge medical bills. Now, that basic system has been broken, I think, in many ways to incredibly dysfunctional results, but the enterprise of private insurance is not illegitimate or inherently evil. It's actually kind of fulfilling an important need. And the most vulnerable people in society, by which I assume he means the destitute or the disabled, don't typically purchase private health insurance. They're typically covered through government programs like Medicare or Medicaid. Other than that, though, you're doing amazing.
It is companies like this and people like this guy that are the reason why healthcare is so insanely unaffordable in this country.
Yeah, no. Insurance companies might contribute to the problem in some ways, but the actual healthcare services are incredibly expensive. And that's a problem that exists before the insurance companies come in and have to pay the bills for people. We could get into the many extremely complicated ways in which US healthcare policy is broken and explain why the cost of healthcare is so astronomically expensive in the United States. But the insurance companies come in at the paying end. Once those costs have already been accrued, the reason things are so expensive, I mean, it might have some involvement, but is not primarily due to insurance companies. I'm just kind of struck by the comfortableness and confidence with which these people are proclaiming and celebrating the death of somebody while also demonstrating kind of profound ignorance about how this stuff even works. And some of them seem to be pretty openly suggesting additional targets for assassination.
Hey, remember that time Bill Burr pointed out that the Nestle CEO believes that water isn't a human right? Something to think about today. No particular reason.
Hello, FBI. Yeah, we have TikTokers suggesting additional targets on the hit list for this assassin. Like, this is not normal. This is not a stable, rational person's contribution to political discourse. Like, maybe you hate the US healthcare system. Maybe you want socialized government health insurance. Let's have that debate. But wanting the CEO of a water company assassinated because you don't like something he said is unhinged. It's not normal to want to murder the people you disagree with, or to want them and their families to suffer in pain like this next TikToker does.
Oh, how awful. Did he at least die painlessly? To shreds, you say? Well, how is his wife holding up? To shreds, you say? Very well then. Good news, everyone!
Y'all are giving demonic. So now it's not even just this man whose death you're celebrating and hoping it was painful, but also his wife? Like, I don't know how to explain to you guys that when you're cheering for assassinations of private business people who, as far as I'm aware, haven't broken any laws, we're not talking about leaders of terrorist groups who carried out attacks or something like that. You're not the good guy in the situation. Let me say that I think people may well have valid frustrations or hatred for some of these insurance companies. I know a lot of people have bad experiences with them where their claims are unfairly denied or what have you, and I'm not delegitimizing that necessarily. All I'm saying is that even if the CEO was the boogeyman they're making him out to be, even if this was a horrible company, the solution to that is not assassinations or cold-blooded murder in the streets and celebrating violence against your fellow citizens. It's to advocate for policy change, it's to pursue criminal charges if crimes are being committed, or it's to boycott or divest from companies with harmful business practices, not to start shooting people and cheering about it on the internet. That's disgusting and deranged, no matter what your perspective or how you feel about the issues. And while I admit the limits of my knowledge about the US health insurance industry, and like some of these TikTokers, I hadn't heard this guy's name until this happened, I've done a little bit of reading about it over the last 24 hours, and I'm not sure this dude is the boogeyman villain they're making him out to be. It sounds like within the health insurance industry and within his company, he was viewed as a really good person, an excellent boss who cared about his employees and really was dedicated to trying to make healthcare accessible. They also keep painting this boogeyman of UHC as this evil corporation that's profiting and just denying everyone's claims to dance in money piles. In reality, he was being paid $10 million, which for a CEO of a large company isn't that much. And even if he was paid $0 and all 10 million went to paying out claims, that's like a tiny decimal rounding point in terms of a difference it would make. And even the company ran a 6% net profit margin. That's not that much. That's way lower than tons of companies in tons of industries. Maybe they were stingy with their claims. Like, I don't know. But people also apparently failed to take advantage of the avenues that they had to contest those decisions. And I think if you're going to blame Brian Thompson or UHC for the cases in which the people didn't get the healthcare they needed and they died, you also have to give them credit for all the far more cases where they did provide healthcare for people and pay for it, and those people got life-saving treatments. Like, I'm not saying this guy should get a Nobel Peace Prize, but I'm not sure that the world is as black and white and cookie cutter morality as he was just unambiguously evil, like these people are making him out to be. I think it's probably a lot more complicated than that. And I also think the frustration with the US healthcare system belongs much more at the feet of policymakers who have written rules and regulations and passed programs that have just broken and effed up this industry beyond repair, not with the players in the game, who don't get to decide the rules. Unfortunately, it wasn't just on TikTok where many left-wing people were celebrating this murder and engaging in all sorts of unhinged discourse. This was also the case across Twitter and its liberal imitator, Blue Sky. Mike Figueroa, the commentator who goes by Humanist Report, tweeted, F his family, too. Yeah, his two sons are the worst and just deserve terrible things to happen to them as well because you disagree with the business of their father. What? Meanwhile, the left-wing journalist turned activist Taylor Lorenz, formerly of the Washington Post and the New York Times, posted on Blue Sky that in her group chats they were spamming a meme of a smiling star, a bunch of balloons and thumbs up that says, CEO down, which suggests to me that you're friends with some strange and unhinged people, babe. Here's where Taylor really crossed the line, though, in my book. She responded to this ongoing news story about the assassination of a healthcare industry CEO by posting the name and photo of another industry CEO, like basically suggesting, get this person next. I don't know that that quite crosses the line into criminal territory, but it gets kind of close and is honestly just unhinged to be like encouraging assassins and telling them go here next. Remember, this is somebody who until very recently, when she went independent, was a star reporter for the Washington Post, was heralded by the media industry as like an icon of their profession. And yet all the while, she was evidently this hardcore leftist activist who celebrates the death of people she disagrees with. That is disturbing just on an individual level about her, but also alarming for what it suggests about just how embedded and normalized radical left-wing extremism is in our modern mainstream media. At the end of the day, you will never catch me celebrating people's death, even if it's a CEO of a business or an organization I so strongly disagree with and I think is really harmful to the world, like Planned Parenthood or one of these LGBT groups trying to transition minors. I will never be celebrating deaths or murders of people just because they disagree with me, even when I think they're really harmful. So even if you feel that way about health insurance companies, which isn't necessarily completely fair, but your feelings are your feelings, still don't go down this dark path and start celebrating death. It's not good for you, it's not moral, and it's not going to make anything better. Seriously, explain to me how the murder of this healthcare CEO is going to improve life or healthcare for anyone. It's not. It's probably going to, if anything, just increase security costs for these companies and make them more on guard and hostile and skeptical. This whole story is disturbing in its own right. Like the video is just chilling and makes you really just scared about the world and where it's headed. But then the response to it online has been so deranged and so depressing. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below and make sure you're subscribed and don't forget to hit that like button while you're at it. Remember to leave your thoughts in the comments below because I do take the time to read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show. And now we got to check in with the media because one MSNBC journalist just set a world record for woke cringe. Take a listen to what journalist Jonathan Capehart had to say when he was asked about what he's thankful for in an interview on PBS.
Lastly, we are here the day after Thanksgiving. Tell me what you guys said around the Thanksgiving table. What were you grateful for?
Oh, well, we were having martinis and a great conversation about politics, but I'm not going to talk about that. You know, what I'm thankful for in general are black women. They've stood for this democracy. They stood fast for this democracy in this last election. And so I am thankful for them. But in particular, I'm thankful for two specific black women. One is my mom, who turned 83 a couple weeks ago. And so, you know, the longer I get to spend time with her, the more grateful I am for her. And then the other person I'm grateful for is Vice President Harris, who in the vice presidency and in her 107-day presidential campaign exemplified black excellence. And for those of us in the black community and those around the country who love us, seeing her on the campaign trail was something to truly be thankful for.
Lovely.
Is the excellence in the room with us right now, Jonathan? Because I don't remember seeing a whole lot of excellence out of the Kamala Harris campaign. And I'm sorry, but if somebody asks you what you're thankful for at Thanksgiving and your answer is mostly political, the part about his mom was nice. I'll give him credit for that. But it's like, that probably suggests that you have kind of a skewed worldview. Like, you don't have the right things important to you, because your answer should be about your family. It should be about your loved ones. It shouldn't be about political candidates in the world. Like that's actually suggests skewed priorities. And obviously, I can't speak as a Black woman here. I'm not, but is that not condescending and totalizing to have somebody say, I'm so thankful for Black women, as if that's some category of people that all meet up and all have the same views and all do the same things? Like, it's just weirdly collectivizing and totalizing and kind of condescending. Like, they're individuals who might be great, might not be, like, might be someone you agree with, might disagree with you. They might have voted for Trump. They might have voted for Harris. Like, just to blindly attribute to them as them being saviors of democracy or whatever, it's just a weird way to talk about people and groups of people. Imagine getting up there and being like, I'm so grateful for white men. People would be like, huh? That's a weird thing to say. But somehow when you're a woke activist and you say it about like Black people or some sort of marginalized community, it's suddenly okay to talk about groups of people like this. But to me, it's giving like woke KKK again, honestly. The whole thing is just incredibly, profoundly cringeworthy, but it also gives you an insight into just how extreme and out of touch so many members of the mainstream media are these days. But what do you think? Do you agree that Kamala Harris exemplifies Black excellence? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now we got to talk politics for a minute, because Congress just released a huge report on COVID that once again makes many of the establishment class's actions during the pandemic look utterly indefensible. So after a 2-year investigation, a bipartisan group in Congress just released a comprehensive report into the coronavirus, and in particular its origins, that has some interesting tidbits in it. As Newsweek reports, after a 2-year congressional investigation into the COVID-19 pandemic, U.S. lawmakers are supporting the theory that the virus originated in a Chinese laboratory. So this is known as the lab leak theory. It's the idea that the whole pandemic got kicked off when the Wuhan lab leaked a virus, almost certainly unintentionally, that it had in its facilities, rather than the other original theory that was pushed, which was more of a natural origin, that it had spread from animals to humans at a wet market in Wuhan. Originally, the lab leak theory was over and over described as a fringe theory or a conspiracy theory. Some people were even smeared as racist for suggesting it, but as time has gone on, it looks more and more like it's actually what happened. On Monday, the Republican-led subcommittee set up to provide an after-action review of the pandemic published a report subtitled "The Lessons Learned and a Path Forward." Chief among the report's findings was that the virus, quote, likely emerged from a lab, with evidence suggesting that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was responsible. So this isn't an earth-shattering revelation, because many other federal agencies, including the FBI, have already reached the conclusion that they think this is the most likely theory about what happened. But it adds more fuel to the fire, and we'll get into why this matters in just a sec. The subcommittee's report suggests that U.S. politicians on both sides of the aisle now support the lab leak theory. The congressional panel was convinced of the idea after meeting 25 times, conducting more than 30 transcribed interviews, and reviewing more than 1 million pages of documents. They also pointed out that the Wuhan Institute of Virology has some culpability for this accident. Additionally, WIV researchers probably did not use adequate biosafety precautions at least some of the time prior to the pandemic in handling SARS-like coronaviruses, the report added, citing an Office of the Director of National Intelligence assessment from June 2023. The reason this matters is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology has been funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars, but apparently was lax in their safety standards and likely had an accident that caused the pandemic that decimated the world and incredibly harmed the U.S. in so many ways. That's not good. to say the least, and we absolutely should have some accountability for it. But the real reason that I wanted to discuss this story is because I worry that the insane way in which this theory was originally handled has been memory holed or forgotten. People who originally suggested that this might have happened were viciously attacked and smeared. One New York Times reporter even suggested that the theory was racist. Apoorva Mandavili at the time tweeted, "Someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots. But alas, that day is not yet here." Oof. That's a tweet that aged like milk. But more broadly, mainstream media attacked as fringe and conspiratorial anybody who explored this theory early in the pandemic, like Republican Senator Tom Cotton. But few, if any, of those media outlets have really ever apologized for that or admitted how terribly wrong they got it. Some of them have gone on to do good reporting about the lab leak theory, but and move on to suggest that yes, it probably did happen, but they kind of just leave their old bad and unfair coverage in the rearview mirror and move on and act like it never happened, which is wrong. Facebook also had a policy where across the board, they were taking down content that suggested the lab leak theory was a possibility or was serious or should be pursued and censoring it because the science was settled and these were conspiracy theories. And apparently that policy was at least influenced by direct pressure from the Biden White House pressuring the company to take down this speech, which, by the way, guys, is supposed to be protected by the First Amendment. And now this theory that they all dismissed as a conspiracy and tried to censor and smear at people who promoted it as racist or conspiracy-brained or whatever is the leading theory about what happened in the pandemic. And to me, that's a really, really important change and shift to take note of, because it reminds us why banning misinformation or censoring conspiracy theories is such a bad idea. Because yesterday's misinformation is sometimes learned and discovered to be tomorrow's truth, but only when you have an open conversation and discourse. And yes, sometimes actual fake news or actual baseless conspiracies will spread as a result, but it's exponentially better to have that open debate and free flow than it is to trust the experts or really just the people in power at these big institutions and companies to decide the limits of the discourse, to decide which scientific theories are legitimate and which are not, because that's always going to be done politically and it's always going to be done poorly because nobody can be trusted with that kind of centralized power and authority. If they had been successful in shutting down this discourse completely, they weren't, thankfully, we never would have had this important realization about the true nature of the pandemic, and that means we wouldn't have been able to take accountability or prevent it from happening again in the future if we didn't even understand what really likely caused it. That's actually quite bad, and that would have been a direct result of the culture and push to crack down on misinformation or conspiracy theories that is still really widely embodied and defended by much of big tech, much of the mainstream media, and much of democratic politics. Many of them haven't learned their lesson, and that's a real problem that we shouldn't just forget about because the pandemic is over. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And now I'll wrap up today's show by reading a few of your comments from recent episodes. One person says, apparently if you say evidence-based 3 times in a mirror, it magically becomes fact. Yeah, they really do. It's actually unfortunate. It becomes sort of a treadmill where one group says it's evidence-based and then everyone else repeats that claim because they just cite that group saying it. And then it's repeated in a bunch of mainstream media, which other people then cite as proof that it's evidence-based. But if the original claim from the AMA or whoever wasn't actually true, then you've just created this whole ecosystem and narrative based on a lie. Another person says, the voice and the face of the lawyer are not mathing. Yeah, maybe I should have mentioned that the Chase Strangio, the ACLU lawyer, is a trans man, meaning a biological female. So that explains the voice there. But I really just wanted to focus more on the substance and content of what was being said. The same commenter adds that I think it's fair to mention that there are those parents who would do the unthinkable and transition their kid for monetization, virtue signaling, clout, and clicks on social media platforms. I agree with you. I don't think that's most parents of so-called trans kids, but it's definitely some of them. I mean, you see the families where they have 2 or 3 trans kids. Like, that is statistically basically impossible that that would happen organically. It is sus, and we can't just blindly trust all parents to have their kids' best interests in mind in all cases. Unfortunately, I wish we could, but we can't. Another person writes, Brad, I'm trans. I knew when I was 4 something was wrong, but I couldn't articulate it truly until I was in my early 20s, and that was with years of therapy. If medicalization was an option when I was a kid in the 80s, my parents would have transitioned me. I'm glad they didn't for a myriad of reasons that people like Chase and the ACLU won't even acknowledge. Well, thanks for sharing. And yeah, I completely understand this. Sometimes people say, when I make the argument that like 2-year-olds can't understand their gender, or 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds, they're like, well, they'll show me research. Well, actually, people start understanding, toddlers start understanding gender roles at 3. And I'm like, you don't understand. I'm not saying they don't think about gender at all. I'm saying, or they can't perceive it whatsoever. I'm saying they're not fully formed in that. They're not at a stable, fully reached conclusion. And I don't understand how anyone can think otherwise. I just don't. Another person says, birth control is discriminatory because it can be prescribed to females, but not males? ? I mean, that's kind of the argument legally, though it's a little more nuanced than that. But yeah, I mean, their argument for sex discrimination is basically if you could do something as one sex but not as the other, it's inherently unlawful and discriminatory. But again, we kind of do that in a lot of ways in society that are allowed. So it's not clear to me how they square that circle. Another person says, doesn't the trans status of that lawyer indicate a conflict of interest? Also, I didn't even have to look in the comments to know that he's trans. His voice and eyebrows give it away, and honestly feel bad for him that his voice is a complete giveaway. Well, I don't know if I feel bad for Chase because he probably could have done voice training or something to work on it more, so he must not really mind. But no, that doesn't constitute a conflict of interest. The bar for what's a conflict of interest is pretty high, and just belonging to a demographic group doesn't cut it. You'd have to have some personal stake or financial involvement. Like a black lawyer can participate in a racial discrimination case, same way a trans person can participate in a trans discrimination case. To me, that's not a conflict of interest as far as law is concerned. Another person says, hey, Brad, I'm a trans minor and I slightly agree. I believe in a rigorous system for minors seeking transition that includes years of counseling and psychological evaluation that takes possible underlying issues into consideration before medication is talked about. However, I want the medical transition to be on the table for extreme cases like mine. I'm on these meds and I'm so scared that they're going to get taken away from me, and it seems like no one on the conservative end of things cares how terrified I am. Sure, lefties do, but their sympathy is hollow. They only care because it benefits them politically, and their activism only hurts me further. I'm just a scared kid. Well, I'm so sorry for what you're going through, and I do agree that people don't have enough compassion or nuance about this, and I can understand why you are fearful. I think if it were possible to do what you're describing and truly limit minors accessing these treatments only to the genuine, very rare, severe gender dysphoric kids, maybe I'd be on board with that. But I think the system's just moved so far away from that we are kind of being forced into a binary all or nothing choice here. And that is unfortunate for those edge cases and exceptions, like it sounds that you're in. It really is. But we can't make policies about the edge cases, unfortunately. And hopefully, if you do lose access, the treatments will still be available for you when you reach the age of adulthood, and you can happily transition if that's what's best for you. Another person says, seriously, all I want for Christmas is to have people please stop using the term raw dogging for anything other than its original meaning, and honestly, keep that to yourself too. Yeah, it always makes me uncomfortable when I see that slang used, but also, I agree. I don't really need to hear it in its original context either, like little TMI. Another person says, I would join a GLB organization you put together, Brad. Well, I don't know that I have time to be putting together organizations or doing anything else, but I appreciate the support. Another person says, I'd like to pose this scenario to the activists. A child says they're gay, a parent wants conversion therapy, and a doctor states that conversion therapy is necessary for the child's mental health and to prevent suicidal ideations. Would these same activists say that should be allowed because the doctor recommends it and the parents consent? I think we know the answer. Yeah, I agree. The parental rights and autonomy argument that the trans activists make is the exact opposite of the position they take on conversion therapy. So you've identified an inconsistency there. You absolutely have. Although you could also say that's an inconsistency among some conservatives who think, oh, well, it should be between parents and doctors if they get their kid conversion therapy. That shouldn't be banned, but then don't have that same energy for gender transition treatments. I've always been supportive of restricting both, so I'm actually pretty consistent on that one. Another person said, Brad, Sphinx cats, they are your solution. They are hypoallergenic and adorable. So they are adorable, kinda, in their own, like, weird alien looking ass kind of way, but unfortunately they're not hypoallergenic for me because I'm allergic to their saliva still, not just their fur, and they lick themselves and they're covered in it. My uncle has some, and when I visited I still got totally allergic. So it'll just be dogs for me. All right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do make sure to subscribe if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go, and remember to leave your thoughts in the comments section. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.